All right, everyone. So let's talk about the Roman-Jewish conflict. This is a subject that I find to be very, very fascinating because, for one thing, the subject of the Roman-Jewish War, it is it's a story that takes place in the Middle East. And when it comes to the Middle East, one thing that people will always refer to or will always talk about is Islam and Islamic violence. As soon as you bring up the Middle East, it's about the Arabs and the Jews and how they hate each other and how we have a problem with Islamic fundamentalism. And I'm not denying these things. I'm not naive to the reality of sectarianism in the Middle East. But what I will try to shed further light upon is the fact that this sort of thing has been taking place in the Middle East thousands of years, even before Islam. When you look at something like the Syrian civil war, for example, you'll see videos going all the way back to 2012 and forward of atrocities, of horrific executions. You'll see videos of people being thrown out of buildings. Yes, even before ISIS. In the Syrian civil war, we saw these al-Nusra types, these guys who fought for the FSA, throwing people off of buildings, executing innocent civilians, murdering soldiers, just really nasty and ruthless and sinister things. And you look at something like that and you say, wow, this is some pretty horrific stuff. But when you read Josephus's book on the Roman-Jewish War, in a way, you can just imagine if YouTube had existed in those days. If cell phone cameras had existed in those days, and you could just imagine the type of footage that you would see from the Roman-Jewish conflict. And really, it would not have been that different from what we see on the internet today. Because the violence that we see in the Middle East, the violence that we have been seeing in the Middle East, is something that is really rooted in a violent temperament that exists within that subcontinent. And it has existed within that subcontinent for thousands of years. And reading Josephus's Roman-Jewish War, you can really see the horror, and you can really see a pattern that is quite common in the Middle East. When we talk about the Roman-Jewish War, people tend to have the History Channel narrative. They tend to have the cheap, garbage, historical reenactment video narrative. Jews want independence, Romans fight, Jews fight, Romans destroyed temple, and that's the end of it. And there, so far I've read, I've read through over half of Josephus's book so far on the Roman-Jewish conflict, and I will say that while there was a tremendous amount of violence between the Romans and the Jews, and while the main struggle within the war was the Jews versus the Romans, there was a tremendous amount of infighting between the Jews. The Jews butchered each other tremendously. And one may even argue that the Jews and the Jews and other Jews were killing each other almost just as much as they were fighting the Romans. There were horrific atrocities that were committed by the Jews towards other Jews because there were two main factions. There were two ways of thinking that competed against each other in the conflict. There was the mentality that said, well, Romans are bad, but, we can live with them. And there was the other mentality that said, no, we got to get rid of the Romans. And the one mentality that wanted to purge Judea of the Gentiles and purge Judea of the Romans, they were the ones who were the aggressors. These were the ones who were butchering the other Jews who really wanted peace. There was a faction of the Jews known as the Zealots. And the Zealots at first sided with the Pharisees, but then they turned on each other because the Zealots within Jerusalem were led by a man named John. We call him John, but it's really an Anglicization of the Semitic name Yohanna. And Johanna was a known thief. He was a dishonest, cruel, and violent man who led a faction of zealots against Josephus. Yes, that's right, Josephus. Before Josephus was an historian, Josephus was an official. He was a ruler, and he ruled over the region of Galilee. And within Galilee, there was a city, a small city, I should say. It was called Gischala. Gischala was a very well fortified city. It had very tall, lofty towers that protected it. And the Jews of Gischala were very confident that the Romans would not be able to penetrate Gischala due to its tall, overbearing towers and walls, fortifications. The Romans eventually broke in. The Jews defeated the Romans in the first battle of Gischala, but then there was a second battle that took place immediately afterwards, and the Romans defeated the Jews and took over Gischala. Now, when the Romans had taken over Gischala, before they fully conquered the city, Johanna and his gang, they all fled. They fled to Jerusalem. I'm pretty sure Johanna was in that mix, but many of the Jews that were in Gischala, they fled to Jerusalem, and they knew that they were going to have to fight the Romans in Jerusalem because Jerusalem was the biggest city in Judea, and they knew that it was quite obvious that the Romans were coming, because if the Romans were going to take full control of Judea, they had to take control over Jerusalem. So the Jews in Jerusalem, they began to vie with each other over who was going to control the city. And you had Johanna on one side, and then on the other side, you had the Pharisaic officials. These were Pharisees, and the Pharisees were bad. I mean, they were corrupt, but they weren't as bad as Johanna and his gang. And so the Pharisees, they were led by a guy by the name of Ananus. And Ananus knew that it was kind of futile to fight the Romans. Johanna wanted to get rid of Ananus, and by the way, Ananus is just a Greek way or a Latinization of the Semitic name Anani. And then there was another guy by the name of Jesus. Yes, that was his name, Jesus. And Jesus was a priest. We'll just say Yeshu, just to prevent confusion. Yeshu or Yeshua, he was, or Joshua. I'll just say Joshua. Joshua was a more of a moderate, and the zealots, they knew that they knew that their numbers were small in comparison to the mainstream Jewish establishment. So what they did was they sent a letter to the Jews of Idumea, the Jews of Jordan. These were Arabs who had essentially converted to Judaism. So ethnically, they were not Hebrew, they were Arab, but religiously speaking, they were Jewish. And they basically said that Jerusalem had been taken over by these very corrupt people, and they needed their help to retake Jerusalem. So the Arab Jews marched to Jerusalem by the thousands, and the Arabs, to make a long story short, they invaded Jerusalem. And together with the Zealots, they butchered thousands upon thousands of Jews. It was very, very brutal, obviously. And once the Arabs had made this massacre, the Zealots took over the city. And they took Joshua, and they took Ananus, and they stripped them completely naked, and they murdered them, and they dragged their bodies out of the temple, stepped on their bodies, and mocked them. This is some FSA level stuff right here. Then there was another man, his name was Zechariah the son of Baruch. And Zechariah the son of Baruch was known as a very righteous man. And the Zealots wanted to kill him, but they didn't really have any justification to do so. So what they did was they appointed 70 judges, and they made a mock trial. And even the judges who were just recently appointed, they said, "We find no fault in this man, Zechariah of Baruch." And the Zealots took out their swords, and they hacked Zechariah of Baruch to death right there in the middle of the courtroom. And they looked at the judges, and they said, "Here is your verdict." There was another holy man. His name was Niger. His name is spelled Niger. Niger. It's a very Semitic name. Niger was another righteous and upstanding man, and the Zealots dragged him out, and they started to hack him with the sword. And as he was being hit with the sword, he cried out that God will curse you with famine, with famine, disease, and civil war. He's basically, God is going to strike you with delusion and you will begin to kill each other. And that's exactly what happened. And it's very interesting that when the Idumeans, when the Arab Jews came to Jerusalem, when they came to the gates of Jerusalem, Joshua, called Jesus by Josephus, this man named Jesus came to the Idumeans and said, "Do not invade the city. The city has been taken over by thieves. The temple is under the control of thieves." Isn't it interesting that Jesus, the Messiah, made a similar statement in regards to the temple at his time, that the temple was controlled by thieves? Isn't it interesting that when the zealot Jews wanted to have Zechariah of Baruch executed, that they made a mock trial, and the judges said, "We find no fault in this man," and the zealots had him killed anyway? Doesn't that remind us of someone? Doesn't that remind us of something? Doesn't it remind us of a situation, of an historical event that everyone has heard of, at least to a certain extent? The trial of Jesus. Pontius Pilate saying, "I find no fault in this man." The Jews wanting him dead anyway. History sure rhymes. And it's amazing that many Jews will say the New Testament is anti-Semitic. But yet, when you read Josephus, you find the same sort of evil documented by this historian in his book on the Roman-Jewish conflict. Mock trials, the murder of innocent people based on false accusations, the temple being controlled by thieves. It's all there. It's all there. And one thing that happened after the zealots took over was that they began to murder innocent people. They began to murder innocent people. They went to a place called, I'll look it up right here. They went to Masada. We've all heard this place. They went to Masada, and then after they went to Masada, they went to a place called En Gadi. And when they went to En Gadi, they butchered all the people of En Gadi. And look what it says here. Look what Josephus says here. He says, "But because the city, Jerusalem, had to struggle with three of the greatest misfortunes, war and tyranny and sedition, it appeared upon the comparison that the war was the least troublesome to the populace. Accordingly, they ran away from their own houses to foreigners." Jews fled their own homes and took the refuge of foreigners, "and obtained that preservation from the Romans, which they despaired to obtain among their own people." So they couldn't get help from their fellow Jews because their own people were murdering them. They had to get protection from the Romans. Reminds me of the Apostle Paul, when Paul knew that the Jews were after him, and they said that we will never eat until we kill Paul, and Paul had to get protection from the Romans. It's amazing that Pontius Pilate himself did not want to kill Jesus, but the mob wanted to kill Jesus, and the Roman government was pressured into acquiescing to the demands of the mob. I find it interesting that today we hear about, the Jews and how they were persecuted by the Romans. But yet when we actually look at the account of Josephus, who was a Jewish historian, we see Jews fleeing Jews and running to the Romans. I found that quite fascinating. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.